So welcome everyone. Laurie and myself are co-presenting this Zoom meeting. We used to call them webinars, and we're taught to call them Zoom meetings. And we note that everyone has some encounter of the unwanted kind with wildlife in both the home as well as in the backyard garden and bigger garden. So we are pleased to have you with us. Laurie, do you want to say something?
Nope. My name is Laurie George. I am just like James, I am a small farms local foods educator. My office is in the Mount Vernon area. So if any of those that are down in the south central portion or the southern portion of Illinois, feel free to contact me.
Yes. Thank you. And let's get started here. And I have the control.
No, you do.
Okay.
Next slide, James.
I cannot. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
All right, so today we're going to be having a talk on wildlife. We'll talk about wildlife and benefits. We'll talk about wildlife habitats and what you can do to help change the environment or maybe make it a little more stressful for the animal. We'll talk about human and wildlife conflicts and how to resolve some of those. And we'll also talk about co-management techniques. These co-management techniques are going to be an accumulation of several things. It's not just going to be one or two things that's going to control the wildlife that you're trying to get rid of or manage. It's going to be a group of techniques, and we'll talk about those throughout the webinar today. And at the end, we'll just go ahead and give you some resources. So if you have any questions or concerns, there are places that you can go to. Next. So let's start with the wildlife and benefits. Go ahead. Next. So what is wildlife? Well, the National Wildlife Federation defines wildlife as being a broad reference to all wild plants, animals, and other organisms. You know, when we think of wildlife, we think of non-domesticated vertebrates, such as birds and mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. But it's more than that. Wildlife not only is a term for wild animals, but it can also cover other life forms, such as insects, plants, fungi, earthworms, microscopic organisms. Wildlife can be found in many different types of environments, from the tropical rainforests to the our type of forest that we have here, the grasslands, deserts, and from rural areas to the most populated urban areas. We as humans tend to look at wildlife through different perspectives, and we separate their existence into legal, social, and moral issues. When we talk about legal issues, we're talking about designating rules and regulations on humans concerning species that are near extinction, for example. Social, we're establishing habitats and securing food sources to help promote wildlife in specific areas, conservation organizations, preserving nature for future generations, basically what we're doing for social. On the moral aspects, does the animal have moral worth? Meaning, is it essential for human survival? Or if we remove the animal, will it cause pain or deprive pleasure from someone in our community? So overall, it's important to maintain a healthy ecological balance. Animals and plants, microscopic organisms, all of them are important. And each of these organisms has a unique place in the food chain that helps to contribute to the ecosystem in its own special way. Next. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits. We have some of the aesthetic and recreational benefits that we have. Have you ever taken a walk in the park or the forest in the fall while enjoying the leaves changing colors? And you notice and watch the squirrels and chipmunks as they gather and bury their seeds for the long winter? Or in winter, do you walk the trails and see the fresh deer tracks in the snow? Believe it or not, you are communing with nature. The aesthetic value of nature, the cultivated gardens and landscapes, maybe watching a newborn fawn begin walking, or finding a baby bird on your back deck, just learning how to fly. We interact with nature every time we go to the lake for swimming, fishing, or camping. Organizations and individuals establish areas to help promote hunting and fishing, following local regulations. Forest preserves have nature trails for those that like to hike, or viewing stations to watch birds and wildlife. All of these are benefits. Land that's suitable for humans is also suitable for native plants and animals, right? So we set up conservation areas to promote and sustain wildlife. For example, setting up a riparian buffer zone, a vegetative zone around rivers or streams helps to create a wildlife corridor for animal travel, nesting areas for our birds, and feeding areas for small rodents. This system also has a social benefit by filtering pollutants that are common with surface runoff before it gets to the water source, and helps to reduce erosion concerns along the banks of the water source itself. Many organizations work with communities on nature programs that focus on backyard or schoolyard habitats and allow kids and adults to have educational opportunities. On the ecological benefits of nature, how do living organisms relate to one another and to their physical surroundings? Have you ever been out in your backyard in the evening, enjoying the weather, but having to go inside early because the mosquitoes are out in force? By putting up a bat box, you can change the environment. Do you know that bats can consume up to 3,000 insects a night? That's really good news for the bats. It's really good news for you, but it's really bad news for those mosquitoes. Just a small habitat change can make all the difference in the world. What about in your garden? The earthworms, the rodents, and the beetles, they all help to turn over the soil. And by turning over the soil, they also recycle nutrients for your plants. In our Master Gardener and Master Naturalist classes, we teach individuals about the importance of plants and wildlife. Incorporating trees and shrubs into your landscape not only creates a habitat for wildlife, which is something that James will be talking about in just a moment, but depending on where the plants are located, they can also be a windbreak for winter winds on the north side of the house, or provide shade in the summer, both of which have the potential for reducing your electric bills. Next.
Yes. Throughout this presentation, we'll be talking about manipulation of the habitat so that you can manage. Remember, I don't even like using the word control because it's almost impossible sometimes to do that, but to manage the wild animals to a level that you're comfortable, around the house. So what's a habitat? It's a home. It's an alternative name for a home for the wildlife, which is a complex mixture of plant communities, water, animals, and then you have other elements that are from the weather, heat and cold and all those. And so other environmental factors that provide cover and food that the wildlife need. So when we talk about habitat modification or manipulation, we'll be considering all the things I just mentioned just right now. And if you want to improve habitat, because you want more animals to come or some certain types of animals to come there, you'll have to do certain changes. At the same time, if you want to discourage certain wildlife or all wildlife, again, you have to manipulate that habitat. And there's a lot to learn, as we shall see in this presentation, and more that we won't even tell you here. And we also want to know that when you modify a habitat, say you want to have more ducks, the habitat may support less deer now if you have more of the duck. Or if you have more squirrels, that's what you want. Then you'll have fewer songbirds because the squirrels will be discouraging the songbirds. For every push, there is a pull. That's the thing we gotta know. So When food, water, and shelter and space blend well in some sort of equilibrium, wildlife not only survives, it also thrives. If one of these components misses, the wildlife that is resident or visiting you must travel or move to somewhere else to find the missing component. Increasing human populations impact the natural environment. Isolated or destroyed habitats, which is what we do quite often when we do development, when we build homes. When we have those destroyed habitats, we force the wildlife to crowd into smaller areas, or they may find a new area to go and habitat. Some wildlife types are not very mobile, so they're put at some disadvantage. And local populations, therefore, could become finished. I don't want to use the word extinct, but you kind of extinguish them from the area that you are in. And new habitats also, when animals move to new habitats, there are certain risks, and we'll talk about that in a later slide. Food is needed year-round, yet habitats may only produce food on a seasonal basis. Example, right now, the cottontail rabbits have plenty to eat because there are lots of forages out there. Lots of annuals to eat, including our crops. But come fall and winter, those things are not available. What are they going to be eating? They're going to be gnawing on the bark of trees, and especially young trees, which could end up being destroyed. It's also possible that food sources that are available one year may not be available next year. Acorns on some trees may not be available the following year, may only be available the third year. What are the squirrels and deer and wood ducks going to do? They'll probably move to somewhere else or look for some alternative food. Sometimes landowners or people who own homes are very nice to the animals, and we supplement what they are eating. Did you know that if you planted sunflowers in your backyard, you could be attracting up to 50 species types of birds? That's how important that is. Water is needed by every living thing, we know that, and all those areas that are listed there provide the water. Some animals like bobwhite and quail can get enough water from foods that they eat, be they insects, seeds, or berries, or the dew on plants. And sometimes we build what we call a little pond for the animals to go drink from. So we are helping them. Shelter is needed for protection from predators and weather elements. Sometimes some birds want a safe place where they can lay eggs and reproduce in. So, and a shelter can be very simple. The hollow of a tree for an owl, or a large strand of switchgrass where a pheasant can survive a severe thunderstorm. Space. All animals need to roam. Well, most animals need to roam. Some want to establish territories that they want to defend from competitors of their kind, especially during breeding season. So space management or requirement is species dependent. And if I take a few examples here, one or two, red squirrels need enough den and seeds in an acre of pine, spruce, and balsam fir trees. And other animals need larger areas. Can you believe it? Wild turkeys require about 500 to 2,000 acres of mature woods and green fields. Whereas deer will want to roam over several square miles of woodlots, brush, and openings. And I leave you with that last point there, that habitats change. We humans change habitats like crazy. And then natural elements. You could have a fire, you could have a flood, you could have other things changing habitats. So habitats do change.
Okay, so we'll start talking a little bit about human wildlife interactions. Go ahead and forward. So I think everyone on this webinar has had some sort of human-wildlife interaction. Maybe it was when you found that family of skunks under your new deck, or when you found that raccoon in your backyard pond helping himself to your prize carp for his dinner. Most animals are looking for high-quality, abundant food within their habitat range. If these foods aren't readily available, they may focus on things like our landscape or our ornamental plants in our yard. Maybe our garden produce, such as the fruits and vegetables that we are or were planning on canning for the winter months. Or maybe you have a larger predator that's going to focus on your livestock, such as your chickens or chicks, rabbits, maybe your honeybees. Deer are a big one for fruit orchards, such as apples and peaches. Deer also have the potential for damaging your trees, especially during rutting season, which is late summer to early fall. Some of the larger raptors, such as the eagles and hawks, can attack small rodents and animals up to about 5 pounds. In the summer, the largest amount of calls I get are from homeowners that have a bird that's attacking their tree, or their car mirror, or their window at home. Or how about that woodpecker that's attacking your nice wooden home or deck? Or the bats and squirrels that have gotten into your attic, each of them looking for shelter and a nice nesting place. The biggest concern about human-wildlife interactions are with health issues. Everyone is familiar with the bacterial Lyme's disease, which is transmitted to humans through the bite of an infected tick. Another concerns are bee stings. If you're a farmer growing fruits and vegetables, your concerns will be at harvest time when there's a potential of harvesting the produce that's contaminated with fecal matter containing E. coli. Conflicts will arise when the animal in question is creating havoc somewhere on or near something. No matter where you live, whether it's in a rural or urban environment, these interactions are inevitable. So the big question is, how do we deal with them? Next. So when having a conflict situations like those that I just kind of talked about, it's important to assess what's going on. So there are some questions that you need to sit down and ask yourself before you start doing anything. Number one, is there a concern for human safety, health or safety? This should be paramount when assessing the situation. Having a wild animal attack or injure a person may require you to find a professional to come in and handle. Mosquitoes and ticks in the yard, how are you going to control those? And what about the dust or animal dander in the home when someone has allergies? Or a home that's infested with mice, rodents, and insects? So the first question, human health and safety. Second question, how serious is this problem? Is it something that you can live with? Or is there enough damage and concern to warrant control measures? So let's say you have chipmunks and squirrels that are attacking your tulip bulbs out in your garden. You can change the habitat so they don't have access to them. Is that a possibility? How about deer eating your ornamentals or vegetable garden? Can you replant your yard using plants that deer do not like, or set up fencing to keep them away? There's always possibilities of changing that habitat. Third question, if you make changes on your property, how will it affect your neighbors? Larger animals such as deer generally go where the resources are. You may have a neighbor that wants to bring in the deer and it's offering it salt licks and hostas and all those plants that they love, but you're on the other side of the fence trying to keep them away. These types of conflicts are best worked out together, bringing in a professional agency to understand all of your options if needed. The last question you need to ask yourself is whether you have the time and the tools to deal with these conflicts. If you have a hornet's nest in the tree next to the kids' playground, you may want to think about calling in a professional to remove it rather than doing it yourself. You need to know your limitations, and you shouldn't be afraid to call for help. Next. James?
Yes. I got it. Next.
Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about co-management techniques. So these are going to be techniques that you can try and apply into your area, into your environment to try and control these animals. Next. Go ahead and go down. There you go. So co-management is the process which minimizes the potential of animal intrusion into your production area, whether it's your vegetable garden, whether it's your flower garden, or your trees, or your ornamentals, livestock pens, whatever it is. While on the other hand, you are trying to conserve the soil and water and other natural resources so that you're not damaging the environment. So in the context of controlling wildlife, the two most important things you need to think about before resorting to killing the animal is habitat modification and exclusion. So changing the habitat to make it more stressful or less appealing to the animal is to modify the habitat. To do this, you need to know the animal. You need to know what type of habitat it likes. What type of food does it like? Do you have an outside dog that you feed and water on the back deck? Well, now that you do that, are you now having problems with maybe raccoons coming up on the deck at night, causing you problems come morning? Why are they coming on the deck? What about that skunk family under the deck that I mentioned earlier? You know, how did they get under there? How can you modify the environment to exclude them? In the context of wildlife damage management, exclusion refers to the use of barriers to reduce access of wildlife resources, such as the food, cover, and water that James talked about earlier. This method is both a type of habitat modification as well as a form of damage prevention. From an integrated pest management perspective, meaning you're taking all these techniques together, exclusion is probably one of the best and most important methods for dealing with wildlife. It emphasizes prevention, it emphasizes non-lethal control, it's least invasive, it's non-toxic, and an environmentally friendly method of wildlife control. Next. James?
Yes. So just a minor point here, structures that lack full foundations, such as trailers, sheds, or decks, are vulnerable to entry by skunks and woodchucks and raccoons and other burrowing animals. Crushed gravel that you may have around the house may not be good enough to prevent these critters from digging. Therefore, you can use a shallow trench screen, and it is shown here, and I don't know if you see my pointer, but this trench screen should go underneath the soil, away from the house, about 2 to 3 inches, and a foot away from the house. You bury that under, and then when you come against the wall of the house, you roll it up to at least a foot high, so that none of these animals are scratching on the side of the house as well. And they can dig under this, under where you have the trench screen. So that's just an extra precaution here, because some of these diggers are excellent burrowers. And so it may even sometimes necessitate that you bury the trench screen even deeper than 3 inches, because some of them might go even under that. So that's the point that is being made here.
Okay, when looking at blocking and deterring wildlife, so let's talk about some of these techniques that you can do at home. So blocking access is finding ways to keep the animals out. It's an excellent strategy for interrupting a problem. Basically, protect the border of an area with or individual plants by using some of these techniques. Deterring, it's convincing the animal to avoid the resource. You don't want them to get into that garden. Make it tough for them to do that. Deterrence often needs to be paired with other methods to manage these types of conflicts. So if you're on the farm, if you know you have a significant reoccurring wildlife issue and you're concerned about fecal contamination of the produce or your water sources or other areas of the farm, consider practical methods to discourage the wildlife presence in those areas. Use of deterrence as a method to manage wildlife intrusion. These suggestions here are often effective in trying to minimize that. Decoys can be an effective method for scaring away a number of different types of wildlife, such as the plastic coyote that you see. This can be used to deter the birds, deer, and other rodents. Swans are naturally aggressive towards Canadian geese, so swan decoys can be effective around waterways. It's especially important to move the decoys every few days so they can remain effective and wildlife do not get used to them being in one particular area. Fencing and netting can be very expensive. However, investing in fencing might be beneficial in the long term in reduced and recurring damage to any crops that you have. Even sections of fencing can be effective in moving wildlife around areas where they may be staying. High value crops, maybe such as your fruits or berries, often benefit from lightweight netting to prevent bird damage. Next. Noise deterrents such as air cannons can be effective on birds, and ultrasonic devices can be helpful if the pests are groundhogs or small rodents. There are a wide range of visual deterrents that can be used, such as maybe reflective tape, inflatable air noodles. Think of those tall air noodles at the car dealerships where they go up and down and the arms move up and down, that type of thing. And maybe balloons. Relocation of wildlife is also an option. There are some traps out there that you can catch and release with. But if this option is chosen, be sure to consult with a professional and consider the impacts to the critter's natural habitat. As a safety note, use extra precaution if you plan to handle or be near wildlife, since they may transmit diseases such as rabies, which have a very serious health consequence. In some states, they may require a license in order to relocate wild animals that have been caught in a trap. Many deterrent products have not been tested strictly enough to establish whether they're effective or not, and those that have been tested generally vary widely in their effectiveness. And again, animals can habituate to many of these deterrents that you've seen, especially if it's between them and their food. If nothing really bad happens to the animal, the signal that we send them decreases in importance or shock value to the point of being ignored. The counter move is to be very unpredictable. Vary the tastes, vary the smells and the sounds, maybe the timings of when you do it, so the animals are less likely to become indifferent. Next.
So how do we minimize wildlife conflicts with us? And this picture was taken somewhere in Asia, in Asia, where the elephant has appeared and people are feeling threatened. And the question always is are we the ones who are actually interfering with their land, or are they interfering with our space? Maybe both ways. But how do we minimize wildlife conflicts? And Laurie has just already said quite a number. If we can limit the access or block access to our property, this will help us, the landowners, to interrupt the problem. So we want to keep the animals away from whatever we are protecting, if it's our crops, if it's our homes. And then that way we may prevent the problem from occurring. We can protect the border of an area or individual plants using the right fence for the right job. And as we talk, you'll see that not all fences are not equal, okay? So we cannot use bad netting to keep out a deer. That's common sense. So for individual plants, like a fruit tree, you saw in a previous slide, you can use a 6-foot wire mesh. Now, a deer can jump 6 feet, but when it's an individual tree you're protecting, that's fine. If you're protecting an orchard, you remember the picture you saw behind there, it's got to be 8 feet or modification of the same fence. Maybe the top is lying at an angle, something to just make it harder for the deer to jump. The other thing we can do is to deter the animal from coming to our properties. In other words, we are trying to convince the animals to avoid our resources because we are using 2 or 3 strategies to do that. One is a landscape of fear. We can instill fear in the animals. I've seen people that have installed a sound equipment which is activated by movement, and it starts making sounds like a dog. So that instills fear. On the other hand, and we'll be talking about repellents, what do they have in the repellent? It's usually blood. And when animals smell blood, they think one of their own has been killed. So they stay away. So that deters them. The same thing with the flashy tape for birds, they get confused. What is this? Motion activated sprinklers or mechanized predators or prey calls, like the ones that were just shown a minute ago. Deterrence via disgust is something else. Again, the things you put out there for animals to try and eat could have a vile taste, maybe bitter taste, maybe smell bad. Again, you're deterring because if that has garlic in it, it tastes bad. If it has rotten eggs, it smells bad. So they kind of want to stay away. There's dislike now for whatever they are trying to get. And then it can also be deterrence via discomfort. Go to some of our stores here, like Menard's hardware store, and there are birds flying all over the place. The birds are protected, but they can provide discomfort for them. Like there's this substance which, when it comes in contact with heat, warms up, becomes very hot itself. So our bodies are hot. So when the birds land on some beam or some other place, and that substance is there, it warms their feet, they become uncomfortable. Or sometimes they'll use nails or spikes in areas where pigeons want to nest. That is uncomfortable for the birds. That keeps them away. Now, effectiveness of most of these deterrents that I just described varies. And I think I can start saying right now that you use a combination of ways to deal with this wildlife, as many as you can, not just one. Removing animals from property, and I just saw there that somebody said that in Illinois you're not supposed to move animals in your property, which is correct, because there are some issues there. You move the animal to some other place. Where are you moving it to? Is it to a neighbor you don't like? You move it to the park. Now it's in a new territory. I mean, it's not allowed. So you are right. So, and then removal might be a temporary solution to the problem anyway. You caught one rabbit, what are you going to do about the 4 other rabbits that are in the yard? You still have that. If food and shelter are still available, other animals anyway might now come and take place of what you removed. So you may just be making a new problem out of, by solving one, okay? So if you're removing the animal, remove the food as well that had attracted it in the first place for a more long-term solution. Such foods as pet food, spilled bird seed, or cold compost heaps, you know? So those are all things that you can think about. Toxicants. and traps. The one thing about those is that they are non-discriminating. It could be your dog eating what you put out for the pest, or it could be your child that found a little bit of bait for something else. I mean, for some animal and messed with it. So take care not to harm non-target organisms. And yes, the label on every one of these chemicals or toxicants that we're going to use, the label is the law. You have to read that pretty good. And then what is the wildlife, or what species of wildlife is messing with your plants? It really needs to be well identified. So also, common sense again, reduce temptations in predators. Why did you leave your chickens not securely locked in the coop so that anything could enter there? You just predisposed your animals to the predator. So that really is part of your, you share in the problem there. On small acreage, in managing wildlife, you may wanna just think about keeping them, because Laurie said, what's the problem with having 2 or 3 rabbits in the yard? Not an issue. In the 1 year back, like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I don't know what happened to the predators, and this one lady walked up to my office and said, I can live with 4 rabbits, I can't live with 40. What am I going to do? So the numbers went down again, because obviously when you have more food of one type, the predator also increases in number. And so the following year, there was no problem. But if you're just having a few of these rabbits, don't worry about them. Other landowners want to leave the land in a natural state, maybe develop a prairie garden or a butterfly garden or make a pond. They're interested, they are master naturalists, they are naturalists at heart. So they want to keep these animals. Again, there's a lady here in my county who is having a difficult time with the city because she's developed one of these prairie gardens and the neighbor thinks she's neglecting her yard. So that is going on right now. And what the habitat needs for desired wildlife. So if you want to have your hummingbirds coming, what are the best plants for them? The plants that have flowers that are tubular is what the hummingbirds want. Maybe you want to feed it with some sugar or something like that and get to know what they need so that you can have them around. And all this requires proper planning, implementation, education, and maybe asking for some advice. That's why extension is available. The Department of Natural Resources in various states, they are available. Get yourself educated. And I think in the next example here was some examples of deterrences. And the one picture here that I don't know if it's very well visible, a tree with a whole lot of yellow-belly sapsucker holes that have been made by the yellow-belly sapsucker. How do you discourage this bird from coming back from year to year? And they seem to know the same tree they were in last year. They go back to the same one. Flashy tape around it may confuse it the next year. So you could use that. You could use the scaring items that are shown there, the balloon there with a face, or the owl that is wooden but looks real. You can also bind that tree with a wire mesh, okay? Canada geese, you can manipulate the habitat. You can have a little fence by the edge of the pond. You can harass them. Don't provide water for them. These Canada geese, each one drops about half a pound to a pound of feces. So if you have 10 or 20, you're getting very many pounds of feces on your lawn. Bats, they carry a virus that is of concern to humans. And what they search for in your buildings are those neglected openings that you have failed to block. And sometimes Blockage simply means you take a newspaper on a long pole and just block that hole. Just do something about it. Don't let them find easy entry into your house. There are also bat removing companies that you can call on. Somebody asked about opossums, and we'll be talking about the small critters in a minute. Remove pet food at night, don't leave it outside. And for many of these small critters, don't have trash cans that are not well secured. And if you really have problems with them, there are traps and trappers, licensed trappers that you can call upon. Maybe you can also move them. But when you move an animal to new territory, the survival rate is very low. One, it doesn't know where to hide, doesn't know which way to go, it doesn't know from where to go for water. It has to learn the new territory. Secondly, it's a trespasser. It's going to find other animals of its kind that have already claimed that territory. Okay. It may be a disease carrier, that was emphasized. It could be invasive. It could go there and overtake who else was living there and now become the new pest in the area. And then finally, it knows it's in a new place and it wants to go home and starts walking and coming and, having been used to being fed by somebody, it may want to be looking for humans actually to feed them because that's what it got used to. And in trying to cross the street or a road, it may get run over very easily because it's confused. So moved animals are unable to adapt, and that's one of the key reasons why the Department of Natural Resources needs to be involved when you're moving animals. Exclusion has already been described, and exclusion is just keeping what animals you want to keep away, and what animals you want to keep in. So if you have sheep, you want them in. Have that fence to protect them, to prevent them from going out. And at the same time, keep animals out. The deer carry Lyme disease, which can be brought into sheep and goats. But in erecting this fence to do the exclusion, again, I emphasize, do the right job, get the right fence for the right job. And then if there are any holes in the fence that may allow coyotes to come through, block them. Make sure that you're maintaining your fence. So again, removal of the animals, again, doesn't really solve the problem. And toxicants, if you're going to be poisoning them, it doesn't discriminate. It could be killing your animal. And the animals that you are now trying to remove or dispose, if you're going to dispose of it, which we are not recommending so much in this presentation, is that species protected? And therefore, and as well, which removal approach is best? And I keep saying, use trapping experts to really help you do this. Again, maybe just to recap and to emphasize that it is not easy to deal with wildlife. In fact, it's a big challenge for the homeowner, the small landowner to deal with wildlife. It takes time and money. Sometimes it's difficult to identify what pest is messing with your vegetables out there. But if you can tolerate some damage, do the analysis. Is the money you're going to spend way much more than the benefit you're going to get? And come up with your decision. And also remember that even though we don't like these birds and some of these butterflies, they have the aesthetic value. We like to watch them.
Okay, excellent information. So let's talk a little bit about some of the laws protecting wildlife. There's nothing worse than seeing a deer out in your peach orchard or peach trees munching away at those peaches when you want to take the rifle and just go get rid of them. But you just can't do that. So let's talk a little bit about some of these. So next. So federal agencies generally are the ones that help to regulate wildlife management, and some of the ones that are available are the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which tends to protect and manage threatened and endangered species, or the migratory birds, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The US EPA regulates the use of repellents and pesticides. So a lot of people go to their local box store, they buy these repellents and poisons and everything else and put them out to try and get rid of the wildlife. But it's the EPA that regulates these. So much of them have to have an EPA number. They have to have writing on the label and what it will control and what it will not control. So if you're going to use anything as far as a repellent or pesticide, make sure you read the label, that it's going to target the animal that you want to try and control, and that you have concerns about the environment or other wildlife that may get into those poisons. So keep that in mind. It's the EPA that regulates that. OSHA, which is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, regulates worker safety rules. So this is specifically for the farms, maybe some of the commercial ag farms, corn and soybeans, as well as specialty growers that sell the tomatoes or grow the tomatoes and the peppers that you see out at the farmers markets. You know, there are regulations that they need to follow, and OSHA does handle that. And the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this makes recommendations for the prevention of human and other types of diseases that can come from animals. So there's some really good information on their websites as well. Next. So in Illinois, it is illegal for an Illinois resident to take, kill, possess, sell, keep as a pet, or transport any wild bird or other animal without the proper licenses or permits from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. So that's going to be important no matter what type of wildlife you're dealing with. The Department of Natural Resources is the one that's going to have some really good information or techniques for you to use. Next. So one of the groups that I just mentioned was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they are responsible for the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And what this means is that most birds that you have out in your backyard or front yard or garden are going to be protected. It prohibits the taking or the killing, capturing of any protected migratory bird species without prior authorization by the Department of Interior U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So the majority of the birds that you see out there are going to be protected. So trying to control them through poisons or other means can be illegal. Next. So let's talk a little bit about some of these unprotected birds. I said most are protected. There are a few that aren't. So the house sparrow, the European starling, and pigeons are non-native species, and they all tend to cause problems. I'm sure that those sparrows, those starlings we see in the wintertime when they come in those big groups and nest in the trees and eat the garden food that's out there. Local and state laws may vary on the protection status of these three birds, the sparrows, starlings, and pigeons. So you can control these yourself, but make sure if you're going to try and control these that you correctly identify them before you control. So making sure that you have the right species of birds, whether on all three of these. Some of them, there are some lookalikes out there, so get a good bird watching book or bird ID book to help you to identify that bird before you try and control it. Next. One of the biggest questions I get is how to stop the birds from eating the fruit, whether it's on the peach trees or the raspberries that's growing or blueberries, one of the two, you know. There are some ways that you can try and exclude them. The most effective is nylon or plastic nets in fruit areas to reduce the roosting on the rafters. And so any type of plastic nets that you can put over the bushes, depending on how many bushes you have, will help to control that. The robin there, and James mentioned to me this earlier, the robin there, they can land on the ground and then come in from the side. So if you're just covering the bush itself over the top so the birds can't get to it, you know, think about the bird entry from the sides of those bushes as well, okay? Sticky substances such as tanglefoot bird repellents, things that can be used. These are products that have a sticky substance that you put onto a tree trunk or a ledge or whatever it is where they're roosting at. And it tends to make it very sticky for the bird. It doesn't contain a poison, but the birds find them sticky enough and they are reluctant to land on those areas. These are most effective when only a few birds are present. Too many birds attempting to land on that will eventually remove that gel, and it will need to be reapplied. For humans, this can be a bit sticky and messy, and just to let you know that you do need to reapply that. Metal or plastic bird spikes on perching surfaces. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see those spikes that you can put into the rafters, you can put on the ledges, you can put on anything. And they're strong enough to be able to withstand the weight of the birds, so it discourages them from landing in those areas. The frightening devices that I talked about earlier, such as ultrasound or some of those visuals, the balloons or anything like that, they are for short term only, and they will need to be moved on a regular basis so they don't become accustomed to them. Raptor nesting boxes may help. The raptors, such as maybe the boxes for the hawks, the red-tailed hawks, or maybe if you have eagles in the area or any type of raptor birds, they tend to reduce some of the problems that you have with the insects, with rodents and things that we'll talk about a little bit later. Next.
So food safety and wildlife, we also need to be very much concerned about wildlife because they carry human pathogens. That's the basic reason. So when they poop in the field or poop on our crops, they can spread contamination of various types of pathogens. A pathogen is a disease-causing organism, and you're familiar with the names like Salmonella, E. coli, and other microbial organisms. So because of that, we would like to do our best to exclude animals, and that includes the dogs we love and the cats we love. They should not be allowed in our gardens because of what I just said. And so try as much as we can. I know that we have the limitation, but we need to be looking out for poop on produce that we are about to harvest. So if we find any droppings such as those, we avoid harvesting those. Okay, so keep them out as much as we can. Large numbers of livestock, supposing somebody is your neighbor and they have cows or pigs, and then it rains and water starts coming down from their side to your side, and you have your garden, it gets flooded. You need to treat the produce in that garden with extreme caution. And we have training that we always give under the Produce Safety Alliance, how to handle food safely so that we avoid or reduce microbial contamination, and so that we don't have foodborne illnesses happening. Okay. Ollie? Ollie?
Okay, so let's start talking about the animals in general. So remember, when you're trying to control wildlife, you need to keep in mind their environments, their habitats, and their food habits. Taking away one of these three will help to greatly reduce the population. So voles, moles, and mice, these are the little things that make probably do a lot of damage in the garden, but they're so small, sometimes we never see them. So the moles in the upper left-hand corner, that's a great picture of a mole from the National Wildlife Control Training Program. These moles or these animals tend to spend most of their lives underground. They feed primarily on larvae and grubs while they're tunneling. And so you'll see these active tunnels that may come in your yard as raised areas in your yard. When you go and walk on them, they tend to depress a little bit because you're flattening that tunnel. They feed, so trying to exclude them would be to try and control the grubs and the larvae that are in your lawn itself. You can also try and protect some of your garden plants by installing a metal or hardware cloth barrier. Maybe a 24-inch wide roll of wire mesh or sheet metal can be used. You're going to take that 24-inch wide roll, you're going to fold it in half, and then you're going to put it down into the ground so that's buried at least 12 inches deep. And then the top can go ahead on the top so they of the garden itself. So this is going to help stop them from tunneling into your garden through the ground itself. Now, a good indicator of the moles is that you're going to see these volcano-shaped mounds out in your yard, and these mounds can be anywhere from 2 to 24 inches. So there are many products in the marketplace that will help control these animals. But the biggest thing is to try and control the white grub population. They're also fond of worms and ants. So when they start tunneling into your lawn, it's also going to be a problem for your turf as well. So trapping is the most practical and successful method for these. There are a number of traps on the market that are set on the surface of the runway. So you find an active runway. Which means that it's going to be raised, you tamp it down, you come out the next day. If it's raised again, you know it's going to be an active runway. You take these traps and you set them and you place them into the ground, and as they're tunneling through, the trap catches them and then they are killed. So that's going to be the best way, is probably going to do that. So the voles themselves, as seen in the upper right-hand picture, are active year-round. They have a home range of about 1/4 acre or less. Damages caused can include eating the plants, chewing bark off of young trees, and damages to lawns and ground covers. The biggest one that I see when I work with some of my growers is that you're going to have the damage to the tree bark, and you'll see that in the spring. The habitat areas with heavy ground cover of grasses and plant litter tend to give them that habitat that they need in order to survive. So trying to control that vegetation between the trees or in the planting areas is going to be beneficial to try and reduce these voles. And I see a lot of that again in our orchards. So hardware cloth cylinders can be used, 1/4-inch mesh or smaller, to help protect the seedling trees. So you're going to go ahead and wrap those trees around by the base so that they cannot get to them. And you generally see that most of the damage is done in the wintertime. The wire must be buried to about a depth of 6 inches to exclude the voles. You're going to change the habitat by mowing in between the trees. Like I said, mulch should be raked away from the tree or the tree seedlings, the base of the tree, by at least 1 inch to remove that cover that they like. In the production fields during the winter, Damage to established water lines under plastic has also been seen because they're looking for that water source. So if you keep your water lines, if you have a garden and you keep the water lines out there in the spring, you'll start to see the damage when you start watering and you find those leaks. Those are probably going to be from the voles. Trapping can be effective using mouse traps or those snap traps, but that's only beneficial for small gardens. You want to be able to set traps along the runways every 20 feet. The problem with these is that they're good for the voles, but they can also get other animals as well. So if you're going to set out these types of traps, make sure you keep track of them on a daily basis and that you're not tracking or trapping the animals that you don't want. Toxicants or pesticides. Restricted use pesticides are available and can only be purchased by individuals with pesticide applicator licenses. There are baits on the market that are also toxic to voles, but it requires multiple feedings, and not all of them are going to be rated for vole protection or protection from voles. So any pesticide that you decide you want to use, make sure that you follow and read the label. And the mice, I think everybody's tried to control mice at some point in there. They live in close association with us, humans. The most common species are the house mouse, the Norway rat, and the rough rat. They're very destructive. They not only consume the food, but they can contaminate the food by urinating and pooping around those areas. Damage by gnawing on structures and equipment, and occasionally livestock, especially young livestock. Predation, trapping, and toxicants are generally commonly used to control rodents, but be very careful about mixing these three methods. Poisoning a mouse or rat that's subsequently consumed by a cat or dog may cause that cat or dog injury or death. They're not, dogs and cats are not consistently effective as controls. Traps are very effective, but they require time for checking, resetting, and maintenance. And again, be aware that any toxicants can kill unintended victims. Read the directions and use the product carefully. Next.
There we go. Okay, so one of the most often asked questions is about how to deal with rabbits, and even those of you in the audience right now, you asked quite a bit of those about rabbits. And the eastern cottontail rabbit is the main one that is a real problem with homeowners. Its biology is such that it has a very short lifespan, just about a year on average, and well, longest lifespan is like a year. But most of them live about half a year and they are dead, mostly because they are preyed upon by coyotes and other animals out there. One rabbit can give rise to 3 to 6 liters per year. That's about what, let's say 5 newborns every time. So you have one mother can give rise to 30 of them. So if you have the 4 or so in your yard, you could potentially have 120 rabbits running around. But because of predation, they never get to those numbers. They just die, or rather get predated upon heavily. So rabbits prefer the edge habitat where you have combination of grass and forbs and dense brush areas. Very nice ground cover, they love it. But they also want to come out and always be close to that edge habitat that they prefer. And I'm sure that kind of describes your backyard, the kinds of things that are indicated in this slide. So how do we deal with them? The best is to do exclusion. If you have a small garden of vegetables growing, get yourself a fence. And chicken wire fence, which is just slightly buried, will work. And if it's 3 feet, fine. Can a rabbit jump 3 feet? Of course it can. But when food is so plentiful, like right now, why spend that energy trying to jump over? So they prefer not to jump. So that will give you protection quite a bit. Picture on the top left-hand corner there is showing what happens in winter. You're protecting your young trees or shrubs from the rabbits, and then you have the snow. Now the fence is useless. You gotta go out there and shovel the snow away, or make sure you have a bigger fence so that when you have a drift of snow that is accumulating like that, then they'll not get to your plants. And then we talked about protecting individual trees. Laurie mentioned that. So the other thing one could do is trapping. If you really have some problem animals that you just can't cope with anymore, you can call people that have permits to trap animals. And I think we've already mentioned that quite a bit. The skunks and the raccoons, you can have them come and catch them for you. It can be expensive, yes, or you can wait for seasonal hunting. There is a time for hunting squirrels, so you can wait till that comes along and then reduce the numbers that way. There are 3 types of squirrels that we encounter. The eastern gray squirrel on the top left-hand corner there, and then the more common one, the eastern fox squirrel. I don't think most of us will have seen a flying squirrel, and it's not really that it flies. It can climb up to a tree and glide from one tree to another or to some other surface. So they're not really like a bird that it can come off of the ground and fly. The gray squirrel appears to have adapted better to city life. Every time they try to cross the road, they will stop and look. Run a little bit, stop and look. They survive better from that point of view. The eastern fox squirrel, when it decides it's crossing the road, it just makes a run for it and they really run over. The good thing with them is that they are in larger numbers, so many of them still survive. They cause all these problems, and because of time, I will not spend too much time, but they mess our houses, they dig in the gardens, they have competition with the songbirds. I think I mentioned that earlier on, and they like to chew on wooden structures and they shred the bark of trees. You know all these problems. What do we do about them? We can exclude them if it's our crops or our flower gardens, have some chicken wire over them, over those gardens. And then you can prune your branches back 10 feet from the house because you're trying to discourage them from getting close to your house. If your house has a hole somewhere, repair that. Test repellents, which I've already mentioned here before. Could contain capsaicin. Capsaicin is the ingredient in pepper that causes the heat that we feel when we take hot pepper. Or it could be items like Riparian, which have bitter tasting or bad odor, so you discourage them that way. And they like to gnaw on wooden structures, so you can apply the Riparian. That's an example of one of the substances you can apply there, but don't apply this on edible produce, not something that you're going to eat. And then, as always, if you have repeated problems with this particular animal or few animals, get some professional help. You can stop the squirrels from going up an electric pole by having that shielding there. They are not able to go around this. Somebody asked about skunks. How do you manage these animals? By the way, skunks can also be an advantage. I saw somebody mention in the chat box that voles are great aerators and they eat grubs. Okay, same thing with skunks. They dig up your lawn, which you don't like, They're actually looking for grubs and worms that you don't want. So they are both a blessing and a non-blessing in that way. And so they are best trapped in a covered trap. That spray is not the best thing to get on yourself. And if you ever get on yourself, get a 1/4 cup of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of dilute detergent, and 1 quart of hydrogen or 3% hydrogen peroxide. Stir gently. It will wash that stuff off sooner than anything else. Okay. So modify the habitat for these things. Kill all these grubs so that they have nothing to eat. Garbage cans at night, secure them properly. Don't leave pet food outside. The rodents, make sure you control them. Brush piles, where they could also use as a den. And then sealing the openings that they like so that they can get into your buildings. You're starting to get the theme here with these small critters. Just modify the habitat and exclude them from getting to where they want to go, and you have a better hold on them. Chipmunks, somebody asked about chipmunks. Chipmunks, if they set up a home on your lawn and you don't control them, you probably have 100 of them living in one nest down there. You gotta seal the hole through which they go in or go out. And they always have an escape route and an entry route. They have more than one opening. So look for them and seal those. And plant some unattractive plants in the yard and remove anywhere else that they could use as shelter. Again, it's a small critter. Just try and exclude them the same way you would for a raccoon or a skunk. And this slide, I'm not going to go through it because it's all the things I've been saying. It's kind of a summary slide. The groundhog is included here, which you can trap and relocate, but you need the trapper assistance, or rather, permit required. You're not supposed to move them yourself. Laurie?
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the larger animals. Go ahead, next. So the biggest question we get is deer, right? So whether they're taking a break from eating your fruits and vegetables or creating human interaction accidents, deer are probably the one animal that everyone likes to see at a distance, but hates to see in their gardens and production fields. Deer vehicle collisions are probably the biggest threat to human safety, and these generally occur between October through December. Deer are associated with the movement and development of ticks that carry Lyme's disease, as well as other diseases that can threaten the health of livestock. I know of one instance of a deer attack in a city park based on the female defending her young. They like to eat the ornamental plants, they rub their antlers on the trees, and they can impact the native communities with their grazing. In production fields, growers need to be cognizant of deer intrusion by scouting the fields for nibbled food crops and fecal matter. Going out and shooting them is not the answer, and that can get you into a lot of trouble. Unfortunately, there are no research-based, non-toxic solutions that have been proven to repel deer when applying on fruits and vegetables. And I'm talking about research-based. There are things that you can do, such as excluding them from the fields by using multi-strand electric fences. Frightening devices, such as noise deterrence and visual deterrence, can be used. But as we mentioned before, they will need to be moved on a regular basis so they don't become accustomed to them. Deer have a very sensitive sense of smell and rely heavily on it. There have been some recipes on the internet for repellents, such as ammonium soaps, stinky egg salad products, therium, capsaicin, garlic, blood meal, all these things, as well as homemade remedies, such as things that include human hair and soap. But again, most of these recipes have not been proven that they work all the time. But if you are going to use these deterrents, remember that deer feed from the ground level to as high as 6 feet. So apply any repellents within this range. I can give you some basic suggestions. Scented soaps hung around the garden area or in trees close to the garden area. Placing them near the plants that the deer attack would be your best bet. So maybe drilling a hole in the soap, attaching a rope and hanging it from the tree or a limb of a shrub. The only downside is that the fats that are in the soap may attract rodents. You get rid of one, you may get another. If you're going to use a deterrent in your food garden, please remember to read the label of the product to make sure it can be applied to fruits and vegetables. You don't want to be eating soap when you're eating your peppers. Next. If you live in an urban area or a metropolitan area, city limits, within city limits, or outside of the city limits, there are some deer control issues you need to be aware of. So in an urban or city area, if you're an individual or a property owner, there are deer removal permits that are issued for properties that are not incorporated within the city boundaries. They can be issued in incorporated areas if the owner has received a written waiver of any pertinent firearm ordinances from the city. If the property is not within city boundaries, the landowner should contact the local IDNR district wildlife biologist to request a deer removal permit. If the property is incorporated, you need to contact your city or municipality first. Next. Next. If you are in a city, no, back one. If you are in a city or municipality, there are deer population control permits that are issued to agencies, organizations, associations, and municipalities, but they're not issued to individual landowners. So these deer population control permits authorize the reduction or control of deer by non-traditional and or non-hunting methods. Again, you're going to have to contact the local Illinois Department of Natural Resources biologist for more information about these permits. Next. And so your next question is going to be, who is my IDNR, back one, who is my IDNR district wildlife biologist? So on the department, the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, that's your website that you're going to go to. And the link down below is going to take you to the information on a map of the state, as well as the name and contact information of who your wildlife biologist is, depending on where you live in the state. They go by zones or regions, and so one person may be in charge of 10 counties within Illinois, so contacting them would be your best bet should you have any questions or concerns. And this is an excellent website to go to should you have any additional concerns on these permits. Next. Let's talk a little bit about birds of prey. So birds of prey are also known as raptors, a term that comes from a Latin word which means to capture. They are the top of the food chain. They are such things as eagles, red-tailed hawks, vultures. They generally feed on small rodents, fish, small livestock, and dead animals. It's not common for them to focus on small pets. However, if you have livestock, such as chickens or chicks, take measures to help protect them. And these are some of the protection measures that James talked about earlier. The bald eagle and the red-tailed hawk are opportunist feeders, meaning that they will feed on what is most available and what's going to take the least energy in order to acquire it. For example, they will often follow the fall migration of ducks and geese and feed on birds that have been injured or have died. They also feed on the voles and the mice, rats, rabbits, hares, ground squirrels, all the smaller animals that we've been talking about. The hawks also eat birds, including pheasants and bobwhites, starlings, and blackbirds. They will also help to control some of the snakes you may have and any animal that is easy prey and generally less than 5 pounds. Eagles prefer relatively open areas in which to take their prey. Lambs or kids are kids, not adult kids or human kids, but the lamb kids, are much less vulnerable to eagle predation in brushy or wooded areas. They just can't, they're big enough that they can't fly into those close confined areas. While use of such pastures may not completely prevent the eagle predation, it may help to protect the lambs and kids up to about 4 to 6 weeks of age. More effective in protecting sheep or goats in small pastures than in large pastures and open range conditions, particularly where livestock are spread over large areas. So the smaller the area for your sheep and goats, the better off you may be for trying to control it. Vultures generally do not hunt. Instead, they tend to feed on dead animals. The habitat ranges for birds of prey will depend on the availability of the food. And for the eagle, it can go as far as 100 square miles. Next. Let's talk a little bit about predators that we may have out there. So the two that I see or get questions on most often are going to be the coyote and the bobcat. Coyotes are Illinois' largest wild predator. They are opportunistic. They shift their diets and take advantage of the most available prey. So they'll eat just about anything that's out there. Most of their diet consists of animal matter, but they often eat insects, fruits, and berries. Rabbits and mice are important food items. They occasionally kill livestock, poultry, domesticated pets, especially where these coyotes tend to live in large numbers or in close association with people. Eliminating all the coyotes in an area is not a realistic goal because of the voids will be filled. So it's you control one family or one coyote, it opens up that range for others to come in. So that eliminating all of them is not going to be realistic. Non-lethal deterrence measures to control coyotes on farms at night might include better electric fencing or corrals for your livestock, using guard dogs if you have it. Some animals such as donkeys and llamas, they tend to help control coyotes coming into the livestock areas. Lights and noise repellents also work. So if you have problems with coyotes coming up on your deck, you may want to use an active motivated light that comes on when it senses movement and then go off when the coyote or the animal leaves. The bobcats in the southern third of the state, there are concerns with bobcats. For these, you can use woven wire enclosures to discourage bobcats from entering your poultry areas or your small animal pens at night. Bobcats can climb, so wooden fence posts or structures that give the bobcat footing may not be effective. They also have the ability to jump fences 6 feet, just like deer, or more in height. If you can, use woven wire overhead if necessary. Fences are seldom totally effective, except in very small enclosures. Bobcats prefer areas with sufficient brush, timber, rocks, and other cover, and normally do not move far from these areas. Keep the brush cut or sprayed around the ranches and farmsteads to eliminate routes of connection or connecting vegetation from the habitat that the bobcat is in and potential areas of where your livestock is at. Next.
And then, so this is a summary of the reasons why control programs fail, whether it's a nuisance animal or it's a damaging animal. One is because we only stick to one management strategy. IPM, I mentioned IPM a little bit, integrated pest management, where you use more than just one method to manage whatever it is you're managing. And then we don't monitor enough for damage. You're not checking daily for your, you don't go to your garden often, and you go there too late after the rabbits have all done their damage. So you kind of fail there. And then the animals become accustomed. I talked about the habituation and being accustomed to humans, and they don't fear anymore. And then they'll also, the programs will fail because there is lack of other available food sources. If you discourage a wildlife and it has somewhere else to go, it will go there. But if it doesn't, then it will probably, if it doesn't have that option, then it will probably end up eating something else on your property. We just had one person said the deer have actually been eating plants that are supposed to be unsuitable for deer. Well, if I'm a deer and I'm hungry, I will eat anything that I find, okay? And then if you don't have a management plan or anticipation of seasonal damage, if you don't realize winter is coming and you need to protect that apple tree that you just planted, if you don't anticipate that and put the wire or the protective plastic cover, then you only have yourself to blame. And then you don't, it's not a one-time thing. You're not using your gun to kill these things and then problem is solved. It takes time. If you're not going to be using lethal weapons like those, it takes time. And sometimes then, if you have 40 rabbits instead of the 4 that you can tolerate, then yes, there will be an issue with control program. So again, I can't emphasize enough. Use integrated pest management approach. Don't just use one. See, there's a big fence there that will take care of the deer. Maybe a few other critters that are bigger. Maybe you have sheep and goats around. They can get in here as well. So just use a combination of practices so that you can overcome whatever it is that you're trying to control. Over here, we have a reference, and I'm sure that every state in the United States, if anybody is listening from elsewhere, there must be brochures and advice and institutions, the Department of Natural Resources or extension offices, you know, within the universities, where you can go and get more information. For us here in the Midwest, these are 2 references that I have included here.
So there's a really good extension website called Wildlife Illinois. This is updated, it is current. The link is sitting there, right there at the bottom of the screen. It has really good information on wildlife identification, if you don't know what you're looking at or what type of wildlife you're dealing with, how to prevent the problems, where to hire or how to find a wildlife control operator, as well as those individuals that may find baby birds or deer that have been abandoned or think that they're abandoned. You know, there are resources out there to find wildlife rehabilitation centers. So some really good information if you're here in Illinois or anywhere, but basically this is going to be just for the state of Illinois. Feel free to reach out and use this resource. Next.
Well, I'll talk about this one. Again, if you need more information, there's lots of information out there. University-based information is the best, but then again, you have the other departments, the Natural Resources, Department of Natural Resources, and animal control authorities, the health department. Look for information from those areas and you should be good to go.
So additional references that we have here as well that we've used in the PowerPoint presentation and some that are available as well. The Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS in your area. Illinois Native Plant Society, if you're looking for plants, maybe the types of plants that deer do not like. Prevention and control of wildlife damage. That is through, there's a handbook there. Additional information was from a co-worker's slide set from Dave Shiley. I think many of you may know Dave Shiley from University of Illinois Extension. he had some excellent information that we tended to incorporate a little bit of that into our presentation today.
And so it's 1.5 hours since we started, but
Can
thank you for those of you that have hung on. We started off at 58, now we're at 43, and we still appreciate that you stayed on.
James, can I start talking a little bit about some of the questions that are in the chat box?
Please, please.
Is that all right? Okay, so there were questions. The questions that are on the screen are the ones that were brought to our attention before the webinar started. What I'd like to do is to start with some of the questions that have been asked by those that are still on the webinar itself. I have one that says that they have birds nesting in their bathroom exhaust fan, and should they be concerned about that? Yes, because the poop that the birds create and the nesting material that they have on there can cause health hazards to humans. And you see that also with bat poop. So if you have the guano that tends to be accumulated with bats. Histoplasmosis can be a fungus that's found and can affect humans. And it's generally from soil contaminated by pigeon and starling droppings. There are other types of diseases that can be transmitted by birds that will affect men to a lesser degree. So if you do have a concern with that, that nesting in your venting area, I would say that you would probably need to remove it, clean it up, and get rid of it, because that can affect your family. The other one, do you have suggestions for protecting bird feeding areas from cats? James, do you have anything on that?
Just keep it out of reach of the cats. If it is, if it's hanging with a even like something like a thread from a high position, that should keep out the cats. That's my only suggestion there.
We did have a suggestion from one of our participants, says grease the pole, organic oil or something like shea butter, that may work so the cat can't climb it. That sounds like pretty good.
and actually if the pole is made of metal, the cat will not be able to climb that. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a gentleman that works at a school, and they have a courtyard that attracts geese and ducks every year, and they like to nest there. They changed the area around the courtyard to try and discourage this, but this year they still had a goose lay eggs, and currently we have a duck sitting on a nest. Are there any suggestions on that? My
suggestion would be to involve the DNR. They come and take them away to wherever. Yeah. Because I'm soft-hearted. I don't want to see animals dying. But then again, if I took him, where am I taking him? I would want somebody from DNR to come and take him and maybe position these ducks, these young ones, somewhere, maybe where they can try and live. Otherwise, I don't know what else you can do, because even if you created somewhere for them to walk away from that fence, where are they going to go to? This is in the city, right? Or maybe at a school. Well, yeah, they may not know where to go. Yep. Yeah, and then also modification of the habitat. Yeah. How can you discourage these geese from coming over there? Yeah, the courtyard can have something, structure, some plants planted over there, just make it unsuitable for these birds. Okay. How about keeping raccoons away from the house, including the roof and the soffits? I've always told Rolly, if somebody called me a raccoon, it would be a compliment, because a raccoon is the cleverest of these critters. What do they eat? Everything. When do they feed? Anytime. Where do they live? Everywhere. Now, with that kind of an animal, and it studies people so well, it's so difficult to exclude it. Although, if you are securing your dumpster real good, then you have prevented it from going there. your pond, if it has fish on it, you better be having some screen over it because they'll go and fish. So they are very difficult. They are very clever. And if you have a fence, it can be 10 feet tall, they climb over. There's only one thing that has beaten them, electric fence. Now you don't want to be putting an electric fence around your house though. So just discourage them from getting to what they want to get to. Your house, the dumpster pile, your fish in the pond by covering that real good, and then good luck at that point in time.
So if you have raccoons that are getting in the soffits up by the roof area or on your roof, how are they getting up there? Do you have trees next to the house that maybe you can start doing some pruning on the trees so they can't access the roof from those vantage points? Or do you have a garage that's sitting there that is enabling them to be able to get onto the roof itself? So again, what James says was trying to change that habitat or modify that environment somehow so they can't do it. You kind of have to be a little bit smarter than the animals, and that can be tough to do. Next question was on the type of raptor nesting boxes that work best. There's a lot of blueprints on the internet if you're looking for an eagle box or if you're looking for a hawking nesting area. Eagles generally don't use boxes, they have nesting areas, and so it needs a nice strong tree. So there's a lot of things on the internet that you can go and look for on that. Let's see. Are sticky tray traps good or bad for mice? Ooh, depends on the mouse. The sticky traps are, it can be good because you don't have to touch the mouse, right? So any diseases that the mouse carries, it's in that little box or wherever it is. The mice walks in, their feet get stuck on the piece of paper and they can't go anywhere. Well, that's nice for you, but it can be a little bit harder for the mouse because they're alive and they can't move. And the only way that you're going to get rid of that mouse is just throwing it all away. So it depends. It can be good or bad. It depends if you have a production area or a food area that you are trying to control mice in. Maybe a sticky would be better than trying to throw food on it with a snap trap and try and catch it that way. So it all depends on the environment, I think. James?
And there's something that Dave Shiley, I think one time said, when animals come into your house, you have all these risks to deal with. So a deer could get into your house and it starts messing around, and if it starts running all over the place, who knows who it will collide with. So at that point, you have dominion over it. You can actually kill it. So again, with this mice and rats and those types of animals, they could be carrying whatever, plague or I don't know what else, and they could be messing with your food and disease could result. So again, killing them with a sticky trap or even with a trap that we are familiar with, a snap trap, is just fine. Yeah, for me, it's good that you're getting them in which way you're getting them.
Okay. Had a question on how to become a wildlife trapper. I would probably suggest that you call the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and see what they say. I'm sure you can call your district wildlife biologist and have that discussion with him would probably be the best way to do that.
And I think they're the ones who do that training, because I have a friend who is a trapper, and whoever asked that question, if you want more information, I can ask my friend and get back with you. But I do believe it is, like you just said, the DNR, Department of Natural Resources.
All right, we have an attendee that says they have problems with woodchucks burrowing by the foundation of the house.
Would that thing that I talked about help? What did I call it? What did I call that thing? The one that you bury 3 feet under or more, or 3 inches.
The wire mesh fence type thing?
That wire mesh thing that you bury under now. Yeah, you can use that one.
Yeah,
And
that works really well.
Yeah, should work well.
So around the foundations of the house, it's going to be a little bit difficult. Like he said, there are some techniques that you can do, like bury a skirt of wire that extends maybe 2 inches underground and 18 inches out from the house, or 12 inches out, as he had that diagram a little bit earlier. You can use single or double strand electric fences, but that's not going to be beneficial if it's going to be surrounding your house. The other thing is that repellents generally work, but what you're really going to want is to try and use some sort of a predator urine that may be on the market, like Fox. Although this effectiveness on these types of urines has really not been studied. There are some toxicants such as gas cartridges or these fumigants that are registered for the woodchucks. If you're going to use them, make sure that you follow the instructions. Other than trapping and trying to relocate them, I don't have any other ideas on that. Will coffee grounds discourage rabbits and small animals?
I had already provided an answer there that it might be one of these things that people try, and maybe it works for them, it doesn't work for them. I don't have any scientific reference for that.
We did have an attendee that said that greasing the pole is not a good idea. The grease can get on the bird's flight feathers and make them unable to fly. So that is probably a good note. Thank you very much there for that. But the cats, as Peggy says, cats are natural predators and hard to discourage. So make sure the feeding station is not near any tall plants or shrubs where cats can hide and reach the feeders quickly. This can help a little bit. Thank you, Peggy. If you don't know Peggy Doty, she is one of our extension educators, and she is familiar with wildlife control for gardens and home areas as well. So thank you, Peggy, on that. So what predators eat chipmunks? Well, we talked a little bit about some of the raptor birds that tend to eat the chipmunks, as well as maybe some of the coyotes that eat some the smaller rodents. So those types of predators can do that. Let's see.
Oh, the high school, yeah?
Go ahead.
Read that. This high school near me, from Margaret. Margaret says the high school near me solved their duck issue by making a hallway for them to exit. Oh, how did that work? A hallway for them to exit.
Well, there's a link on their Facebook page there, so feel free.
Okay.
Talk radio left playing outside near the site will make raccoons leave, so that is another option as well. This will even make a mother with babies leave and move the young as well. Thank you, Peggy.
Lovely.
Can you give me the recipe again for getting rid of skunk smell? I don't know. James, did you?
I think it's a 1/4 cup baking soda, 1 teaspoon of dish detergent, and 1 quart of 3% hydrogen peroxide. I think the main thing here is the hydrogen peroxide and the baking soda. And then you stir gently and use that to wash.
Okay.
Yeah, because it stays forever, by the way. If you try to wash with soap, it just stays forever.
Okay.
But, yeah.
And when we were talking about woodchucks, you have to have a permit to trap the woodchucks. Thank you, Peggy. They do love apples, yes.
So,
go ahead.
Margaret says that she's had raccoons scale the side of a brick home. Well, the hold is probably pretty good. They'll hold pretty well. So again, where are they going to? Are they going to the top of your house because there's a hole there and they can make a home over there? Try to find out why they're climbing on the side of your house.
Yep.
So that if they climb next time and they can't find what they are looking for up there, then they'll get discouraged from climbing. And
I think the last one we have here is talking about they have their pet dog that their beagle dog, and they had no wildlife problems. And guard dogs and domesticated dogs tend to keep the wildlife away. However, the biggest concern is that you may have a dog that is all willing and able to go out and try and control that wildlife out there, but it may not be strong enough to be able to take care of the predator that's out there. So you're really going to have to watch your domesticated animals depending on what you're trying to control. There are larger dogs such as Great Pyrenees that are used in livestock pens and to help control the predators. But then again, if you have a little Chihuahua or a Yorkshire Terrier that has, it's more bark than bite, and you send it outside to try and control something, that's not going to work. So yes, it is good information to have dogs and pets, but make sure that you keep an eye on them and you watch it carefully if you're going to do that. So I think we're pretty much out of time here, James.
Well, yes. Corey said she thinks the sticky traps are kind of cruel because the animals struggle so much.
Yep.
In that case, just use the snapper trap, because that is, the animal is gone in minutes as opposed to the other one. Okay, I'm also soft-hearted. I probably wouldn't like to see it struggling there. So keep it, yeah, you can throw that away.
Okay. And I think we are done. Anything else you want to mention?
And so, yeah, if you're still on and seeing these slides, I think we've really attended to most of the questions here. If we haven't attended to any one of them, please write to us and I just go through the next one, the rabbits and the moles and deers and raccoons. There's one person who said they have a cottontail rabbit, which he calls Pac-Man, because it eats everything except a few of the flowers. And this morning I had started putting in some plants that both deer and rabbits hate. And you see the first three are actually herbs. They don't like the herbs. I mean, those oils, they don't seem to like them. And I'm sure, then you see the Echinacea, black-eyed Susan. Those are native plants, which have coexisted with these animals all over. So they've been eaten and gotten out of being predated all the time. The lilacs, I didn't even know that lilacs are not a favorite of the deer, but it is. And these are available. The plants that are suitable, person who asked about this, they are quite available on the internet. Or you can write to me or anybody that is on the call right now that is with the extension, and we'll provide you with more of these. And more questions. Again, there's a deer that gives birth and leaves the fawns, the young ones, to go and feed. And so, again, those of us who are faint-hearted, we don't want to mess with those young ones. So the thing here is that, why is she coming to your home? The shelter is excellent. The environment is good. No dogs, no whatever, and you love them and maybe you support them. If you now modify your habitat or put a fence over there, you're going to discourage her and others from coming to inhabit your residence. Would you say something else? Anything else? Peggy, you can also come in. As well as...
No, I think that's it.
Okay, and then let's see whether there's one more. Yeah, chipmunks in this area and all that. We talked about those and how to repel snakes, which are not that many anyway. And majority of the snakes are non-poisonous anyway. That's a good thing. And that's our email in case you want to write to us. You have that in the handout. And we thank you. We still have 26 so half of you that are still on. We thank you for your patience and hanging on.
Yep.
And
if there's anything
we'll be sending you. We sent you an evaluation form. I think we would love to hear your feedback
Yes.
on our presentation and where we can improve or change, things like those. Laurie?